Yeah, I just was just about to come on air here this afternoon and was, you know, doing some news gathering, and then this comes across. Uh, Guitar legend Eddie Van Halen dead at 65. Unreal. Unreal. Man, this has been the worst year ever for everything, but particularly for musicians. I mean, good God. I mean, just, to lose in one year, arguably, two of the greatest of all time on their particular instruments, Neil Peart and Eddie Van Halen, is just, what a nightmare. It's just it's beyond comprehension. I don't know what to say. It's a sad day. I mean, there's a lot of great guitar players, and there's a lot of, to me, there's a lot of factors that go into making a great guitar player. It's not just one thing or the other. Listen, there are plenty of really good guitar players out there. There's millions of really good guitar players out there. There's billions of okay guitar players out there. But, it's rarefied air when you get one that has all the factors, because there's a lot of different factors that go into making a great guitar player. And usually guitarists have too much of one and not enough of the other. There's of course, at the top of the heap, there's technique. There's feel, there's sound, there's tone, and then there's serving the song, I mean, back in the day, there was that famous graffiti on a wall in England that said Clapton is God, and everybody called Clapton. I never particularly thought Eric Clapton was a great guitar player. His tone's okay. His technique's okay. But what he had that made him great was his ability to bring a particular thing to a song that elevated it. That's what made him great. I mean, that's why, when George Harrison wrote While My Guitar Gently Weeps for the White Album, he was smart enough to know that he could have played something on that song and it would have been another famous Beatles song in the pantheon of Beatles songs. But he was smart enough to know that his buddy Eric Clapton brings a particular thing to a song when he plays on it. It's not about, he necessarily has the best technique or the best tone or whatever those things that, you particularly add to it. It's the fact that whatever he brings it adds to a song, it elevates that song to another level. And that is a thing that outside of technique and tone and everything else and ability is very rare to have. That really is. And that's what Eric Clapton has. That's what makes him great. It's not his technique or something. See, I always wondered that. I was like, Eric Clapton, he doesn't seem... It wasn't until years later, I realized, okay. Because, you listen to what he brings on While My Guitar Gently Weeps, it's just, it's unmatched. And then there's, creativity, uniqueness. You look at somebody like Jimi Hendrix, who, Eric Clapton famously said when he first time he heard Jimi Hendrix, he wanted to smash the guitar and set it on fire and never play again. But that's what, that's Jimi Hendrix is one of those guitar players. He changed the game because he was the first of the kind to come along. And he had, originality. He had new sounds nobody had ever heard, technique, ability, and that magical thing of what he brought to a song, whatever song it was. It's very rare you have those guitar players that have, usually guitar players have one of those things. Another one is reckless abandon. You know, that's the other thing is, you know, you can have technique, but if it's all technique, you know, like somebody like John Petrucci from Dream Theater or something, it's all technique. You know, like we talked about Joe Satriani recently. You know, Joe Satriani, one of the greatest guitar players ever, but it's, you know, it's all technique. There's no reckless abandon in it. You know, like Jimmy Page. And people call Jimmy Page sloppy, but Jimmy Page has almost too much reckless abandon. Well, there's almost too much. But that's what guitar playing is. It's got to, you know, you got to have technique, but it's also got to have that freedom and that just devil may care, reckless abandon to it. And, you know, Eddie Van Halen, I mean, really, you want to talk about influential guitarists, there's Jimi Hendrix, and then there's Eddie Van Halen, and then there's everybody else. And that's it. That's all there is to it. Eddie Van Halen changed the game for guitarists more than anybody since Jimi Hendrix and more than anybody after him. Period. End of story. Period. Those two guys changed the game for guitar playing more than anybody else in the history of music. That's it. And that's not to put down any of the other guitar players. I'm a Brian May fan. He's my favorite guitar player of all time. He did things and innovations with tone and stuff that nobody else had ever done. But as far as influence goes, he's not on the same level as Jimi Hendrix or Eddie Van Halen. Him and Eddie Van Halen were friends. But Eddie Van Halen was one of those guitar players that just right out of the gates from album number one, changed the game. Completely changed the game. He had people scared. That's just like Jimi Hendrix did. Jimi Hendrix had people scared, like Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton was scared. Eric Clapton was like, I'm done. There's no fucking way I can exist in a world where Jimi Hendrix exists in. There's just no fucking way, because I'm not on his level. And that's what Eddie Van Halen did times 1,000. He scared the shit out of everybody. Everybody was like, oh fuck, what are we going to do now? I mean, Eddie Van Halen probably, I mean, between Jimi Hendrix and Eddie Van Halen, nobody spawned more clones and wannabes than those two guys ever, period. The only third in there would be Randy Rhoads. And he had the shortest, most impactful career, I would say, of any guitar player ever. 2 records. Other than the stuff he did, the independent stuff he did with Quiet Riot before that. But, I mean, really, it's 2 records. The first 2 Ozzy solo records. That's really all we got of Randy. And today it's still influential. But who was he influenced by? He was influenced by Jimi Hendrix, Brian May, Eddie Van Halen. Those were like his 3 biggest influences. Eddie Van Halen, he did it all. He changed the game. Sound-wise, sonic-wise, technique-wise. You know, he gets too much credit sometimes for stuff like the hammer-ons, which he wasn't the first one to do that. I mean, look at the video for Bohemian Rhapsody. Look at the end where Brian May does that. He's doing the hammer-on, finger-on thing. It's actually the guy from King Crimson where Eddie got it from. But he took it to another level. And, I mean, it really scared the bejesus out of a lot of people. And he's one of those rare guys that had it all. He had the technique, he had the technique, but he also had the reckless abandon. And that's so important for guitar players. This guy, a lot of people don't know, Gary Rickrath. He's no longer with us. A lot of people don't know Gary Rickrath. Gary Rickrath was a guitar player for REO Speedwagon. And a lot of people just know REO Speedwagon for their ballads and stuff they had in the early 80s. But they had a lot of big rockin' songs, too, way before that. But Gary Rickrath is one of the best examples, I think, of a guitar player that not only had amazing technique, but just played with that pure, reckless abandon. And it's so good. And that's the thing is because, like I said, you can have technique all day, and you can play, a million notes per second. But if it's just a million notes per second and there's no feeling to it, then it's dead. It's got to have that kind of. It's got to be structured, but also sound spontaneous and spur of the moment, and also serve the song. And it's very rare that you get a guitar. Usually, you get a guitar player. It's all day. You can find a guitar player that has great technique, all day. all day you can find a guitar player that just plays with reckless abandon and is sloppy. You know, all day you can find a guitar player that has pretty good tone. It's the rarest of guitar players have all those factors operating simultaneously, all at once, and firing on all cylinders. That is what makes a great guitar player. Having all this, because don't forget, on top of all of the craziness and the finger tapping and all the wild technique and the weird sounds and the playing with a drill. I mean, there's so many innovations Eddie Van Halen made. I mean, the playing with a drill, figuring out how to put a fucking drill on a guitar and give those crazy sounds and that solo on Eruption, the finger tapping. And on top of all that technique, somebody's fucking mowing outside. Jesus. This is what I'm talking about. On top of all that technique, though, Eddie always served the song. That's the thing about his greatness, is that he still, no matter what, he still had that ability to elevate a song. I mean, listen, you know, people talk about Michael Jackson's Thriller album and how, you know, it's one of the biggest selling albums of all time. I think it was the biggest selling album of all time for a long time. Still, I know it's up there at least the top 2 or 3. But that was one of the big contributing factors to that album. Don't forget that. You know, Eddie Van Halen on Beat It. I mean, just that riff alone is as iconic as any riff in the history of music. You know, it's as iconic as Smoke on the Water or, you know, Paranoid by Black Sabbath or anything. And then the fucking solo, that blistering fucking solo in the middle of it. I mean, Michael Jackson was another one of those guys, smart enough to know that, listen, I could put this song out and this song will be okay, you know, but if I bring Eddie Van Halen in on this, it's going to elevate this to another level that I couldn't do by myself. And that's what I'm saying. So, you know, he had the technique, the tone, you know, the crazy ability and all that, the reckless abandon. I mean, that's the other thing about Eddie Van Halen's playing. Like I said, even though it was technical as it could get, it also had a reckless abandon to it that felt real and made you feel it and felt, you know, you could feel the emotion from it. And those are all factors that, I mean, you can't teach somebody that, you know what I mean? You can't teach somebody how to be a great guitar player. You just can't. You can teach people how to do chords. You can teach people how to play scales. And after that, it's really on the individual to add their own, whatever their own personal thing to it. And it's crazy. One thing it took me many years to learn is that, yeah, it's important. Listen, it's important to have great gear. It really is. But when it comes down to it, it's all in the fingers. It really is. And every single person's fingers are different. And that's what really gives every single guitar player their individual sound. Believe it or not. It's not the amp. It's not the guitar. That's what they want you to believe. Believe me, I fell for that lie for many years myself too. It's not. It's all in the fingers. It's in the soul. It's in the individual. Every guitar player is like a snowflake. It's like a fingerprint. Every one of them is different. But I mean, you could put an okay guitarist on Eddie Van Halen's rig or Brian May's guitar rig. In fact, I've seen stuff where guys, famous guitar players, went backstage, you know, and got to play Brian May's rig or whatever, and they were like, it just still sounds like me. It doesn't sound like Brian May when I play. That's the thing. You know, you can get the same exact gear. You know, I chased that for a while. Everybody chases that, you know. You could go out and buy Eddie Van Halen's exact rig he used on stage, you know, the same amp, same guitar and everything. And yeah, you could learn how to play those songs and you could learn how to play them and you could sound just like Eddie Van Halen, but you're not going to come up with that stuff on your own. You're not going to do something as original as that on your own. You know, that's what makes these great guitar players great is not only they came up with all this stuff, you know, anybody can emulate it. You know, anybody, once it's done, it's there. Anyone can copy it and verbatim play it. but it's becoming an original player like that on your own that's rarefied air, and what makes these guys be seen as the greatest of all time. And that's what Eddie Van Halen had. Period. You know, even if you weren't a Van Halen fan, and the guitar, what he brought to the song, and the fact that, you know, and a lot of people didn't like this. I loved it, actually. A lot of people didn't like in the 80s when, like, by the time they got to, like, 1984 and stuff, which was, like, the last album with David Lee Roth on vocals. You know, Eddie was, that's what I'm saying about being smart enough to know that no matter how great of a virtuoso you are on your instrument, if you're playing in the context of a band and you're not just, you know, I understand you get those guys like Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, they're playing largely instrumental stuff where they're just, where it's all about them and the focus is on them and there's not lyrics, and it's, you know, I get that. When you're playing in the context of a band and it's about the songs and the songwriting, you know, it doesn't matter how great you are. If you're not playing to benefit the song, then you're just a wanker. You're just, you know, you're just wanking off. You're showing off. And that's the thing about Eddie, you know, the fact that he was smart enough to even on some of the songs step back and not even play guitar and play synthesizers and stuff. And a lot of people didn't like that when they, just like they didn't like when Rush moved towards the synthesizer. I love it. I thought it was great. No, that's it. That's Eddie. That's I mean, that iconic opening Oberheim OBX synthesizer sound on Jump. That's all Eddie. You know, I heard this tape one time. I knew this guy. He had lived out in L.A. for a while, trying to get his band a record deal. And as you know, most people do when they just got whatever job he could get while he was out there playing music, you know. And he got this job at this place where he was detailing, washing cars and stuff. And one of the cars that he detailed and cleaned out one time was one of Eddie Van Halen's Ferraris or Lamborghinis or something. And he was cleaning it out, and he found like a blank cassette like under the seat or something, and he pocketed it. And this is not even on the internet or anything. I think he ended up losing the tape or something, but I got to hear it. It was a fucking like a demo because they're like a practice tape, and it was Eddie. I think it was probably like the first day he got the Oberheim OBX synthesizer. I shit you not. I knew this guy that had to say I heard it. It was fucking incredible, and it was just Eddie noodling around on the synthesizer. It seemed like I don't know for a fact it was the first day he got the synthesizer, but that's what it seemed like to me. Because it was just him noodling around, playing going through the sounds on the synthesizer, making different sounds. And he was just kind of going around playing different sounds. And then there was like a pause. It was quiet between him playing stuff. And he got quiet for like 10 seconds. And I thought the tape was over and go quiet. And my friend was like, no, wait for it. Listen. And you just kind of hear, just kind of, you know, different sounds on the keyboard. And then it gets quiet and then you hear, dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. And it was him fucking writing that Oberheim riff on Jump. And oh my God. I mean, I just, today really, I feel like that's not on the internet. That ain't out there, dude. That's gone. But I heard it. It was like hearing Beethoven or Mozart compose one of their famous songs. That's what it felt like hearing that. I mean, it was mind-boggling because you could hear it. You could almost, the silence in between he was noodling around was almost like you could hear the gears turning. You could hear the instrument inspiring him on the fly, and you could hear it just came to him. And you could tell there was like that blank space in between him noodling around, and it just all of a sudden that riff just popped into his head, and he just played it. And there's so many. Love Comes Walking In and the stuff with Van Hagar. There's always the argument about, you know, Van Halen with David Lee Roth versus Van Halen with Sammy Hagar, and there's always an argument. There's always people in one camp or the other. And I never understood that. I mean, if you're a true Van Halen fan, you're a fan of both. I mean, just like I never understood the argument between the early Rush stuff, and there's people that call themselves Rush fans that don't like the later Rush stuff. And I just don't see how you can call yourself a Rush fan and not like it all. If you don't like it all, you're not a fan to me. That's the way I see it. It's the way I've always been. I think the early period Van Halen with David Lee Roth and the later period stuff with Sammy Hagar are equally important. Equally important and equally as impactful as far as the songwriting. I mean, they're really two different bands. I mean, there was talk after after David Lee Roth left of them not even calling it Van Halen anymore. And it really was two different bands, but man, the fact for them, I mean, it really was never really done. You can't really, I don't think there's another example of a band where you got two different distinctive periods of the band with two different lead singers where they both had massive hits. You know, they didn't lose anything having Sammy Hagar. They elevated. They started having bigger hits, and the sound started changing, the palette started changing, and they became, you know, they had even more radio-friendly stuff. Because don't forget, Van Halen was kind of on the decline until, because they had like Diver Down. That wasn't a very big selling record. They came hot right out of the gates with the first couple of records, and then other than, you know, people wanting to go see them live to see Eddie Van Halen play guitar, you know, they were kind of on the decline. And that was why David Lee Roth made the decision to go solo, because he thought the band was dead. I mean, he thought they were done. That's why he went solo, and after 1984, that was the last album they did with David Lee Roth, and then they brought in Sammy Hagar, who had already been, they had crossed paths with Sammy Hagar early on, even when Van Halen first started, because Sammy Hagar started out in the band Montrose. I've talked about that before here on the show. Still, that's one of my favorite records of all time. It's one of the greatest rock records ever made. That first Montrose record. The second album, not so much, and they broke up. They got rid of Sammy, and then he went solo and had a great solo career. I mean, how many solo albums did Sammy put out between Montrose and Van Halen? 8 or 9? I mean, he put out a shitload of solo records. There's Only One Way to Rock, and I Can't Drive 55, and Three Lock Box, and all those songs. He had tons of songs. But in the early days, Ted Templeman, the producer, had produced Montrose's first album, and he went on to produce the first. I mean, Montrose was like an influence. That's what's crazy. Montrose was an influential band on Van Halen when they started. That's why Van Halen got Ted Templeman to produce those classic records, because he did the first Montrose record with Sammy Hagar. Montrose would have been the American equivalent of Led Zeppelin if they would have pulled it together. That first, I mean, you ask any of those musicians from that day, everybody was influenced. You can hear it. I mean, the intro to Bad Motor Scooter, Motley Crue ripped off that Kickstart My Heart intro directly from that song. Directly from that. Rock Candy, listen to those fucking John Bonham Thunder drums and that. They just, they just couldn't pull it together on the second record, and it just didn't work. But it's interesting to listen to Van Morrison's Tupelo Honey record. And then after you get done listening to that, listen to the first Montrose record, and then realize that that's the same band, the same backing band playing on both of those. It's incredible. You're like, wow, how can those same musicians produce such a varied sound? You know, they went from, because you listen to that Tupelo Honey stuff, I mean, that's not hard rock. You know what I mean? That's Van Morrison. It's not hard. I mean, I love that record. I've got both those on vinyl, but to the I think that just to have two eras of a band and Van Halen like that, they're equally influential like that. It's just unheard of. But I believe that's 100% a testament to the songwriting ability of Eddie Van Halen and his ability to know that no matter how much, over the top, flamboyant guitar pyrotechnics he could do, the most important thing was to always serve the song and to always play for the song. And, on top of the obvious stuff, like with the technique and the game-changing stuff that he did, with the guitar tones and not only that, but the guitars that he played and stuff himself. Eddie Van Halen didn't play anything stock. I mean, he was the first. He made modifications to guitars, to existing stock guitars, and made modifications that have become standard and became standard in guitars. Brian May did the same thing. Brian May did it before Eddie Van Halen did. I mean, Brian May had innovations in his homemade red special guitar, and Eddie was largely influenced by that. Him and Brian were really good friends. Eddie was a huge Brian May fan. In fact, they did a record in the early 80s together called the Starfleet Project that Eddie played on with Brian. But Brian was the first to do that, where he, innovations were like the 24-fret guitar and the frictionless tremolo, a tremolo arm where you not only you could go down but up. Eddie made all sorts of innovations and modifications where he all did himself. Rewiring pickups, taking pickups out of guitars and reversing the polarity on them and rewiring them and adding more wire to them, different types of wire and stuff to make them hotter and jamming a humbucker into a single coil guitar and stuff like that became all kinds of things. The other thing was the Echoplex preamp. In the early days, the echo machines that they used and delay machines that produced echo were all tape-based. Before there was analog chips or digital boxes, they used these machines called the Echoplex and the Benson Echo Rec. There was a slew of them. And that's what Brian May, one of his innovations was he learned to be able to stack his guitars and make them sound in harmony and make them sound like there's three people playing at once, is he used three different amplifiers with two different echo boxes set to different rates. So when you play, they would basically come back in unison. But what guys like him and Eddie Van Halen and Randy Rhoads figured out is that these, even after those became antiquated and the chip-based delay machines came into vogue, these old Echoplex machines had a preamp in them that colored the tone in a way and boosted the tone in a way where it would add a certain thing that would help overdrive the amplifier even more. You can buy them now. I have one that I built some years ago. I built it myself. Built it out of it's an FET preamp is what it is. It's got an FET circuit in it. What they call an FET circuit. And I built one myself a few years ago. I built a pedal, a FET preamp, Echoplex pedal. It sits at the end of my chain, my pedal chain. What it does is, see, anytime you get over 15 feet of cabling, I don't remember what the exact numbers are on the equation is, but there's a mathematical equation to it. Every time you get over 15, when you get over 15 feet of cabling, for every inch or foot over 15 feet, you lose ever how much in impedance and in tone and sound and everything. If you're running a bunch of pedals and a bunch of stuff in between it, that signal is going to be greatly diminished by the time it gets to your amplifier. If you run one of these Echoplexes at the end of it, even if you have the echo part turned off and you just use, that's what Brian May and Eddie Van Halen did later, and Randy Rhoads, is if you ran that at the end of the chain before it went into the amplifier and just ran the signal through the preamplifier on the Echoplex without even having the echo turned on, it boosted the signal up, sweetened it up, made it louder, could cause the amp to overdrive more. So that's what guys like Eddie Van Halen and those guys would do. Like I remember back when, in the day, back when I was, a teenager, first picking up guitar, and you would get those guitar player magazines, and they would always have like, the rig rundown or whatever. They always have like the rig specs of whatever guitar player. I remember one of my friends one time, he was big wannabe Eddie Van Halen, and he was showing me that one. He was like, I don't get this. He's like, I don't understand this. It doesn't make sense because you'd hear Eddie Van Halen play, right? And you'd hear that crazy, the fucking full balls out distortion. But then whenever you saw diagrams and stuff of his rig, the gain on the amplifier wasn't turned. You think that because everybody was cranking their gain up on their amplifier, trying to sound like Van Halen, blowing out speakers, annoying the parents, getting the cops called on. People were buying Marshalls and cranking them to 11, trying to sound like Eddie Van Halen. When that's not how he did it at all. I mean, you would look at these diagrams. I remember my friend going, "Man, I don't get this." Doesn't make any sense because the gain wouldn't be cranked up hardly very much at all. It'd be at like 10 or 11 o'clock position maybe, and then there'd be like the MXR distortion pedal, and you think that would be on 11 too cranked. It's not. It's like at 9 or 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock maybe at the most. Not even middle all the way. And I remember my friend going, "I don't get this. How is this even possible?" Well, that's how it's possible. I figured this out many years later, and I do that with my own stuff. You can actually use multiple distortion pedals and boxes, and the gain stage on your amplifier, and if you don't turn them all up all the way, and you just turn them up gradual slightly, you can stack them where you've got one distortion pedal on, another distortion pedal on, and you turn them all down, not all the way up, just slightly. And then you run it into the gain stage on the amplifier and turn that up slightly. And then the last thing it goes through is that Echoplex preamp. And what that Echoplex preamp does is it brings everything up to the level that the guitar signal is at, as if you had only the guitar plugged into the amplifier with less than 15 feet of cabling. You get what I'm saying? When you run it through that, with that at the last stage, it boosts everything up. So you're getting all the gain, you're getting all the signal, and you're getting a monster headroom without having to turn all of the volume up on all of your pedals and your amplifier. That was the trick. That was the trick that Eddie Van Halen and Brian May, those guys, that's what they figured out how to do. And that's what guitar players could never figure out when they would look at these rigs. They're going, I don't get this. How are they getting those distortion sounds like that? And the amplifier is not even, the gain is not even turned up very much. Because that's the thing. Your logical thing. You'd think you'd get a big amplifier. You'd crank that motherfucker all the way to 11. You'd crank the fucking pedal all the way to 11. Maximum distortion. But it wouldn't sound right. It wouldn't sound like Van Halen. It wouldn't sound like Randy Rhoads. But it's a stacking effect where you have everything not turned up all the way, where you're getting a little bit of this sound, a little bit of this. You're getting like, two different. Billy Corgan's another one that did that. He would run like an MXR distortion into an op amp big muff, and then into the gain stage of the amplifier. But none of them were cranked to 11. They were all just barely turned up. Where you're getting a little bit of this one, a little bit of this one, and then the signal is completely boosted on the last stage with the FET preamp. And you can get FET preamp pedals. They've always had those. But only certain guitar players have ever known the real secret to that. And that's how you do that. But that's what I'm talking about. Those innovations in those things in guitar. And that's what makes a great guitar player. It's a combination of all those things. The ability, if you look at all the greats, that's what all the greats truly had in common. Is, there, like I said, there are a million good guitar players out there who've got one of those or the other, There are lots of, really good technical players and stuff. And like I talked about with Joe Satriani, Joe Satriani is one of the best technical players you'll ever hear, but his tone isn't particularly great. It's real sterile and cold to me. Same way with Kirk Hammett, Metallica. It's that ice pick, cold, sterile sound. I mean, he's a good player, but there's something, I don't know. There's always just, I've just never been a Kirk Hammett fan. I don't know. I know a lot of people think he's great. I just have never been a fan of him. It's just something, there's something in it's just something, he's missing one of those things. You know what I mean? There's one of those, he just doesn't have all the elements that make you a great guitar player. He's just missing those elements. And that's not to say he hasn't, played on some great stuff. And yeah, Metallica sold a fuck ton of records. And I'm not putting him down, but it's those factors, man. And it's it's terrible, devastating loss today. I mean, this year, I can't even count all the greats that have died this year. It's hard to even remember them all. I mean, I was looking at a list a month ago, and we've had probably 10 that we've lost since then. But, man, to lose Neil and Eddie in the same year, two are arguably the greatest of all time on their particular instruments, it's devastating. And I was really saddened to read Wolfgang Van Halen, Eddie's son, who, in the last years has been the bass player in Van Halen. It's just heartbreaking. He says, I can't believe I'm having to write this, but my father, Edward, has lost his long and arduous battle with cancer this morning. He was the best father I could ever ask for. Every moment I shared with him on stage and off was a gift. My heart is broken, and I don't think I'll ever fully recover from this loss. I love you so much, Pop. Yeah, he I think it was like last year or something. They went to a Tool concert together, and Wolfgang posted this thing. This guy just randomly came up when the show was over. This guy wanted them. Didn't even know it was Eddie Van Halen. He just came up and asked, just this old dude, hey, old dude, can you take a picture of me and my friend standing in front of the stage? And the old dude was like, yeah, here you go. And the guy had no idea. He had no fucking clue. It was Eddie Van Halen that took the picture for him. Eddie was smiling with him. That was hilarious. But, yeah, a huge loss. I got to say I was happy to see, even though it's terrible and sad, I was happy to see the the news feed today on Facebook be filled up with pictures of Eddie and tributes, and I mean, a huge loss and a huge blow to the music world. But I mean, you listen there. That's the thing. And no matter, there's always arguments. There's always arguments in music and sports and every walk. Who's the GOAT? Who's the greatest of all time? And the thing about it is, there's lots of greatest of all time. I mean, I hate those arguments. There's not one. There's really not one greatest of all time. People always want to do that with bands. Who's the greatest band of all time? Who's the greatest guitar player of all time? Who's the greatest drummer of all time? Who's the greatest bass player of all time? Who's the greatest singer of all time? Who's the greatest basketball player of all time? Who's the greatest football player of all time? Who's the greatest baseball player of all time? Who's the greatest MMA fighter of all time? And look, there's not one. And that's the great thing. There are many greats. There are many GOATs. There's not just one. There's many. And to be considered amongst those, is a huge accomplishment. But as far as influence goes, and influential guitar players, like I said, there's lots of great guitar players. I mean, Alex Lifeson from Rush is one of the greatest guitar players that's ever lived. Go try to play some of the stuff that guy came up with on his own, inventing chords and shit. It's crazy. But he rarely gets mentioned among the greatest guitar players of all time, but he is. But it really boils down to influence. And, without question, nobody spawned more wannabes and more, inspired more people to pick up the guitar than Jimi Hendrix and Eddie Van Halen. And again, Jimi Hendrix was only with us for a short amount of time too, just like Randy Rhoads. But these guys' influence and impact on music was monumental. Game changing to the point where entire styles of music and what record labels would sign and put out was changed. That's, And listen, even somebody like Kurt Cobain did that in his own way, in a completely different way. Kurt Cobain did it in a way where it wasn't about technique. It was about untechnique. It was. He came along at a time when music was oversaturated with cock rock and fucking, butt rock and all these fucking hair fags and all, fucking Hairspray and Unskinny Bop and all that bullshit and fucking Warrant Cherry Pie. That's the thing about music, man, is that, if anybody knew what was going to change the game, everybody would be doing it. You just don't. Nobody ever knows. But, Kurt Cobain changed the game in a time where it was oversat, where people were tired of hearing, long guitar solos and shredding guitar solos. He comes in with this, very rudimentary, and I came up during that period. I came up during the middle. I came up right in the middle of that. That's when I started getting into music, when it was in that in-between period between the sort of the hard rock and that end of it into the grunge and punk and alternative stuff, man. And I liked a bit of all that. I was never into the hair. I was never into Rat and Poison and Warrant and all those stuff. I liked some Guns N' that first Guns N' Roses album. Fuck. It's, you want to talk influential debut albums. There's the first Black Sabbath album. There's the first Van Halen album. There's the first Oasis album, and there's the first Guns N' Roses album. There's, some of those albums are just, they never got bested. They never got bettered. And, I liked Van Halen. One of the greatest moments of my life was getting to skip school, with parents' permission. And having parents take us. Van Halen was supposed to play this show in Dallas, and they had to cancel it because there was something went wrong with Sammy Hagar's voice, and he called in the radio station and said, "Look, I'm going to come back, and we're going to play a fucking free show for the whole city because to make it up to you guys." And everybody's like, yeah, whatever, fucking rock star bullshit, whatever. And I don't know, 7 or 8 months went by, and you didn't hear anything, and then just one day, out of the blue, we heard Van Halen's coming to Dallas, they're coming to the West End, they're coming downtown, they're going to play a free show. It was 2 weeks before Christmas. It was a beautiful day. And there's video of it on YouTube. Me and my friends went, and they made downtown Dallas, that part of the West End, downtown Dallas, not far from Dealey Plaza, they made it sound like a fucking arena. I still don't know how they did it. It was like a magic trick. It was like a magic, because, if you've ever been to outdoor shows, there's no acoustics. Unless you're in an outdoor, like, amphitheater where it's designed to have some acoustics. And a lot of those outdoor shed amphitheaters, they're designed, but even those, if you're real far back, they do it. I don't know. I still don't. I don't know how they did this. It was like a magic trick. I think they just had it down. The sound guy and the soundage and the speakers, they just had it down so cold because they'd been a fucking arena act for so long. I don't know. It's the only way I could explain it. They made that fucking place sound like an arena. It was unbelievable. I never heard anything like it before or since. And then I saw them again on the Balance tour, and that was right before they broke up and Eddie left the band. Not Eddie, but Sammy Hagar left the band. It's interesting that correlation between Rush and Van Halen, with, Eddie Van Halen and Neil Peart both dying this year, because there is a connection there between Rush and Van Halen, specifically during that time, right after the Balance tour, that was the second last time I saw them. And listen, I mean, they were fucking amazing both times. Just arena rock at its finest. I think as far as arena rock goes, I think Rush and Van Halen both best to ever do it as far as arena rock. I mean, this the ability to make an arena that sound, to produce a sound and produce music that's made for that environment. It's a very difficult environment to play music in. You know, some bands can do it and it works, and some bands do it and it doesn't work. But during that time period in the late 90s, after Rush did the Test for Echo tour, when Neil's daughter and then a year later his wife both died, and Rush was on a hiatus for a while, Rush's manager, what's his name, Daniels? I can't remember what his first name is. Eluding me right now. Daniels. He was Van Halen's longtime manager, the guy that, from what I understand, I think this was the reason that Sammy Hagar left. Their longtime manager died. And during that time period when Rush was on hiatus, Rush's manager, I believe he was married to, for a period of time, I forget how it was. He was married to, either he was married to Alex Van Halen's sister, or Alex Van Halen was married to his sister, or I don't remember exactly the details on it, but there was something in there where somebody was married to something. So Ray Daniels, that was his name, Ray Daniels. Ray Daniels came on and managed Van Halen for a while, and he was the guy that engineered the whole Gary Cherone thing. When they brought Gary Cherone from Extreme in as a singer. And listen, I was, like I said, I came from that period of time where, it went from hard rock to, alternative music and stuff. And I liked a lot of both of it. I just liked rock music. I liked distorted guitars. It had a distorted guitar and it wasn't butt rock, hair rock. She's My Cherry Pie. I was down with it, And, Ray Daniels was always known for making some questionable decisions. I mean, he tried to get rid of Geddy Lee in the early days. He hates it when anybody brings it up, like in interviews, so he gets pissed. He tries to deny it and downplay it. But Geddy's even talked about it. He tried to get rid of Geddy Lee at one point. He tried to talk the band into replacing Geddy in the early days, on the first couple of albums of Rush. Yeah. Didn't think Geddy's voice was commercial enough. Music writers and stuff complained about it. He tried to get rid of it. They don't talk about it. Even the whole band doesn't talk about it much. There are some interviews and stuff where you can hear them talking about it a little bit, and you could see Ray Daniels just gets nervous like he's a fucking politician like he's testifying under oath of the Supreme Court. He's fucking running around and gets shaky and nervous like a fucking cornered rat when you ask him about it, because, I mean, how wrong was he? Can't get any more wrong than that. But I was a fan of the band Extreme. They were another one of those bands, kind of like, I have to a lot of bands. I mean, it happened. I think the earliest band I know and it happened to was Kiss. Kiss couldn't get fucking arrested. They had put out 4 records, studio records, and weren't really getting anywhere. And then they put out this stupid, sappy ballad, Beth, I Hear You Calling. Becomes their biggest fucking selling song, elevates the band to superstar status, but then starts to become an expected thing. That happened to a lot of it, happened to Extreme. Extreme was a fucking amazing, hard rocking. They were like the second coming of Queen. If you've never seen Extreme's performance at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert where they do the Queen medley, they stole the show. I mean, just like Queen came on at Live Aid and stole Live Aid, Extreme came out at the Freddie Mercury tribute concert, and they stole the whole show. They did a medley where they just did all this just big mesh of Queen songs. They were the second coming. I loved Extreme. I was a huge fan of them. I got to actually meet Nuno Bettencourt a couple of times. I got to be his guitar tech one time, one of his solo shows. Yeah, it was amazing. Real, just down-to-earth guy. Just, I mean, not a bit of rock star in that guy. And just a huge Brian May fan. So I got to talk to him about Queen. And his favorite Queen album is Queen 2, just like mine is. We talked about that. But Ray Daniels, it was his idea for them to bring in Gary Cherone to Van Halen. And they made one record. And it was terrible, but that wasn't Gary Cherone's fault. It was Eddie Van Halen's fault. Eddie Van Halen at that time, for whatever reason, had made this decision to completely change everything about what made him Eddie Van Halen. And listen, I get it, man. You know, nobody wants to do the same thing forever. You know, nobody wants to, but it was just, it wasn't good. He totally changed his guitar tone. He totally changed his guitar playing style. He wrote all the songs on that record. And then they brought in Gary Cherone. Now, they did, Gary Cherone's right. He says, had we done a tour first with me just singing all the old Van Halen stuff and then did a record later, it would have been better. But that's not what they did. I think they did do some shows with him singing, but they made the record first. And then they went out and toured, and it was a complete bomb. And that record, you know, listen, excuse me, Gary Cherone gets the blame for that record, but it was Eddie who wrote all the songs, and it was just a bad decision. I mean, that's all it was. But, you know, Gary Cherone's a great singer, and I think he could have been great with Van Halen. If you hear you can hear some of the songs where they're doing some of the classic Van Halen stuff, and he sounds great. You know, on the classic stuff, he sounds fine. You know, as good as you could expect a singer to be. But that was Ray Daniels. Ray Daniels engineered that whole thing because he was trying to stay alive and make money while his big cash cow Rush was on hiatus and didn't know if they were going to come back after Neil lost his family. So yeah, there's definitely a connection there between Rush and Van Halen, and yeah, again, just makes it all the more crazy that we've lost both those two of the greatest of all time to ever do it this year. And it's a sad day. It's a huge loss. Rest in peace, Eddie Van Halen. Your influence on music and on guitar players will be there 500 years from now. It will be there. It's as important as, as any musician in history, without question. If you don't know that and you don't believe that, you just don't know what you're talking about. I hate to tell you. His influence on guitar playing and on the instrument, like I said, it's Jimi Hendrix and it's Eddie Van Halen, it's everybody else. I mean, yeah, I still, you know, I'll never forget, and I'll never, I always love the fact that Eddie, when Dimebag Darrell died, and you know, Dimebag had talked about, you know, I mean, he was the biggest Van Halen freak, and talked about, you know, Van Halen was the reason he started playing guitar, and he always talked about that, you know, that yellow and black, famous yellow and black guitar on the cover of Van Halen 2, and when Dimebag died, Eddie brought that guitar, that original, man, guitar is probably worth, $20-30 million, man. I mean, it's a fucking priceless antique. And Eddie brought that original guitar, and he put it in the casket with Dimebag Darrell when he was buried, and he said, you know, Dimebag was an original, so he deserves an original. And that's what makes a true guitar player, or anyone for that matter, a great. Being an original, blazing your own path, and just being an individual. And I think that's something we can all take influence from. Rest in peace, Eddie Van Halen.